What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, and today we're going to do one of our little different, longer, I guess you could call it, philosophically rambly videos. We have them now and again, and it's typically because it's something I don't usually do, or at least a topic I don't usually do it on. Most people know that I don't really do reviews. There's very rare that I've ever considered doing anything similar to a review or anything like that. But, well, given that Sony are now moving into bringing their previously exclusive games to PC, where they look and play the best on the glorious PC Gaming Master Race, well, I figured that I would give more of an unbiased approach on it. Now, why do I say an unbiased approach on it? Simply because Sony games, first-party exclusive games rather, they always get overhyped considerably, mainly because it's the age-old argument. Number one, you look at the Sony camp and they say, well, we have exclusives. Xbox has no exclusives, which is true because all Xbox games release on PC and Xbox at the same time therefore are not exclusive, just like Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone and soon to be Uncharted 4, but you get the idea. So because of that, media outlets, fanboys, whoever it is, they always automatically prop up the score higher than it should be. Now, I'm not going to give it a, well, maybe I will end up giving it a score number, but they give it more credit than it's actually due, simply because, well, it's an exclusive. It's really the only thing Sony has to market, and that kind of snowballs and goes from there. And I feel like that's all very important because when it comes to these two games that we're going to talk about in here, Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone on the PC, I'm looking at these games from a complete outsider's point of view. The only reason I bought and played these games was because they were on PC, where they would look and run the best. Simply because I had no interest in these games previously. I had never played Horizon Zero Dawn before PC. I had never played Days Gone before PC. And they just didn't appeal to me. Neither game appealed to me. I looked at both of those games in the run-up to their original PS4 launch, and I just said, you know what? This doesn't appeal to me for both games. But now that I've played both of them to completion, well, that's where all of this comes in. Now, first off, before we go any further, of course, I do want to say I'm going to put in the pinned comment down below. I'm going to have a timestamp for each game, so you can either go straight to Horizon Zero Dawn, which we're going to start with, or you can jump forward into the video and we'll talk about Days Gone. Now, also, you're only going to see Days Gone footage here, simply because I don't have any more Horizon Zero Dawn footage left, and I can't be bothered reinstalling it just to get a little bit in there. I'm pretty sure I have enough of Days Gone footage to sort all that out. Now, of course, it's important to note as well, how were these games played and experienced? Well, I played these games both at native 1440p, that is 2560 by 1440, 120 FPS, because my monitor I have capped at 120 Hz. But for the record, when the games were uncapped, Horizon and Days Gone would average about 160 to 190 FPS, and of course, complete maxed out settings. The maxed out settings for Horizon Zero Dawn only really included more additional, I guess I wouldn't say features, but more additional effects. It didn't have any remastering of textures or higher quality textures. It was more better lighting, better shadows, better particles, better snow, better etc. You get the idea. However, Days Gone was significantly more important in its improvements, if you will. There are so many extras included in Days Gone, just like there was in Horizon Zero Dawn when it comes to the likes of effects and whatnot, but also, key and importantly, Days Gone included proper higher quality texture settings. In fact, it's been compared, and when you run the upgraded PlayStation 5 backwards compatible patch version of Days Gone and compare the textures to the PC, the PS5 patched version runs lower quality textures than the lowest setting on PC. And I played all this on maximum settings, so you get the idea. So it was a proper, good, true quality experience. Anyway, let's get started with Horizon Zero Dawn. So, Horizon Zero Dawn, which was one of the bigger games of the generation, at least if PlayStation 4 players will have you believe anything. They kind of abandoned it a little bit once it came to PC, because this is the fanboy logic and mentality. It's only good because it's exclusive, and then when it's not, oh well, it was a mediocre, no-name game, IP, blah blah blah. They're just a bit salty. But anyway, the big premise with Horizon Zero Dawn was the setting. And the setting, of course, naturally there will be big spoilers for both of these games, so you get the idea. Technically, they've both been out for several years, even if it is the PS4 version, so I don't know if I can even spoil it for you, but you have been warned. So the big idea and big appeal and draw for Horizon Zero Dawn was, of course, the setting and the characters and essentially the world and the enemies within it, because when you look at it, pretty much every enemy in the game is a giant. It's kind of like a giant take of a robotic animal. There are these massive long necks, which is essentially a huge robotic giraffe. There's all these different robotic panthers, you get the idea. It's all these like giant animals, if you will, but in mechanical form with all abilities and whatnot to go. And the thing that made it a little bit strange and just a little bit of what made that extra more interesting was the fact that unfortunately, this was one of my biggest tropes that I can't stand in like post-apocalyptic games, if you will. But it's where everything reverts to tribalism and whatnot, and it's like, oh, me, Sky God, and they believe all this kind of stuff. But essentially, they're hunter-gatherer era stuff. They're running with like staffs and spears made from rocks and whatnot, and they're trying to take on these massive, hugely advanced robots and all as well. So that's part of the whole situation. And really the big crux of the story essentially in Horizon Zero Dawn is to figure out what happened and how the world got like that, and that's basically it. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the specifics after that, because we're going to look at the game itself and how I felt about that. Now, it's important to note that, like I mentioned, I had no care at all going into this game, so when I went in, my expectations were at zero. I expected this game to not do anything for me, but I will say, for the first 5 or 6 hours, it really, really impressed me. It only got better and better and better as I went along for the first couple of hours. I liked how it would play, I liked how the combat evolved, I liked how they started introducing new mechanics and how it was explained and whatnot as they went forward, how they introduced new enemies and the story plot points and all to go with it. Essentially, new weapons, new abilities, new characters, new enemies, etc. When all that was added in, I really liked how they added it in and how they factored it into the story and how it was introduced. But that's kind of where the game starts to falter, simply because once you get beyond the first maybe 5 or 6 hours, you start getting introduced to the open world and whatnot, and you go from there. Now, the big problem with Horizon Zero Dawn for me was the open world. I like open world games when they're done correctly, but there's so many different times where open world games cannot be done correctly, and I feel like this is one of them. Now, there are many problems. You can have this massive, huge open world with absolutely nothing to do, aka Metal Gear Solid 5, or you can have this open world with arguably too much to do. Now, I say too much to do, you might think, Q, that's a terrible complaint. Why are you complaining there's so much content in there? But it can be like an Assassin's Creed game. They can give you tons and tons and tons of things to do, but it's the same 4 or 5 things over. There's no consequence, there's no benefit, it's very boring and uninteresting, and just feels tedious. But it's usually linked and tied into stuff like upgrades, level ups, character development, or new weapons, new abilities, new powers and stuff like that, and it can feel like a grind. Again, that's another type of a negative open world. And that's kind of the problem with Horizon Zero Dawn. The world is pretty big, the world is pretty expansive, the world is pretty varied. There's all different types, and if you factor in the DLC, the Frozen Wilds I believe the name is, it even brings in a whole new region and biome, and has all different types of new stuff because of that. But that's part of where the problem comes in. It hits the Ubisoft formula. You go into a new region, you're pretty much your best option, or you're almost expected to go to the long neck first to reveal everything around you and then just go from there. But the problem is it's all very, very tedious. The combat is good, but extremely repetitive, if that makes sense. I would hesitate to say that there's too much combat because, again, that can be misconstrued and taken the wrong way. But think of it as a happy medium, or rather a descriptive medium, somewhere between that it's too repetitive and that there's too much of it. So there's kind of a joining somewhere in the middle of there that comes out to a big negative with that. And again, it's the same thing with all the extra mini side quests. Well, not so much the side quests, because those would be ones you get from NPCs, but more so along the lines of the natural occurrences that show on your map. So that takes care of the open world aspect, the positives, the negatives, and of course the combat and whatnot as well. Now, the big problem with Horizon Zero Dawn for me is, like I said at the start, it has that big trope that I really, really do not like. I just think it's one of the worst tropes in post-apocalyptic anything. TV shows, films, games, books, whatever it is. Now, it is explained a little bit more in the future, or at least in the later stages of the game, why that kind of happens the way it does. I still think it's just haphazardly thrown together and just trying to get it in there for the sake of having any reason whatsoever. But I found the story for Horizon Zero Dawn absolutely awful. It was interesting at the start for the first couple of hours, simply because you were first learning about the world. It's like, why are these robots here? What are they doing? Who are we? Why don't we know what we are and who we are? But eventually, as the story goes on, and this happens fairly quickly, this happens within the first 10 hours, if even that long. It might even happen earlier. Again, 5 to 6 hours was where my enjoyment started dropping off. And the main story quest and everyone involved with it, the characters involved with it, the story involved with it, the lore involved with it, I found absolutely atrocious. So for me, the story aspect of it, the interesting story parts, the potential story parts, all that fell off after 5 or 6 hours. It took me about 36 hours, I believe, to finish the entire thing, the game and the DLC. And you're looking at about 30 hours of that where I did not care for the story. It was just terrible. Oh, and one important thing that I will mention here as well as separately in the Days Gone section is one of the reasons I can be so critical about the world is I do not fast travel in games. I'm a big proponent of, if a game has an open world, it needs to be designed in a way to not skip it. If their reason to give you an open world involves you skipping it the whole time, there's a big problem. If there's nothing to do, if it's a bad version of nothing to do, a bad version of too much to do, whatever it is, if they give you a reason to skip it, the open world does not hold up, and that is a big, big negative for me. Now, I never fast traveled, but it was, oh my god, awful traversal. Mount or not. So, let's hit up the review score, if you will. I never like doing these because review scores are a bit of a point of contention here within the gaming industry the last few years. Mainly because a lot of people believe if something is not an 8 out of 10 minimum, it's absolute trash. But let's look at this objectively for a second. On a scale of 1 to 10, 5 would be average. Not good, not bad. Probably playable. So you get the idea. But of course, nowadays if a game isn't an 8 out of 10, it's automatically considered dirt. Oh my god, this game is a 7 out of 10. This thing is a piece of shit. And having said that, it is entirely possible for a game to be 5 out of 10 and just be average. Be not great, but at the same time not be bad, just average. And with that in mind, I would give Horizon Zero Dawn maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10. It just does not do it for me, and that is going to piss off so many people, I can already tell. But now, having said all that, let's move over to Days Gone. Days Gone, of course, released just under 2 weeks ago here on PC, as opposed to Horizon Zero Dawn, which launched last year. And this one had a little bit more potential to be, well, to go either way when it comes to how the game plays, how it felt, and just the overall quality of it. Mainly because Horizon Zero Dawn was very well received on PS4 and PC, but Days Gone was pretty much considered a flop on PS4. It didn't sell great, it didn't sell awful, it just sold lower than expectations for the overrated Sony first-party exclusives. The game had been panned in many ways and the sales reflected that, but of course, given new life on PC, that's a whole other story. Now, I'm going to go out there and put this out here right away anyway. I did not give this game any bias, any positive bias, simply because I'm a biker. I know some of you out there are just going to say, oh, you love it because you're a biker. I'm not going to give it any of that stuff. So Days Gone is pretty much just a new take on an overused and beaten to death formula that we've seen maybe over the last 10 to 15 years that's just been abused into the ground and pounded into dust. It's the post-apocalyptic zombie situation. Now in this one, of course, they're called freaks or freakers, but it's essentially the same thing. I mean, you can look at The Last of Us, where they can get infected with fungus and cordyceps. It's essentially the same thing. It turns them into zombie-ish type enemies. Just like in this one, the virus turns them into freaks and freakers when they get infected, and it kills them and they die and come back. So it's, no matter what way you want to look at it, you know, fungus, mold, leeches, zombies, virus, whatever, it's the same deal. However, unlike Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone is a bit more grounded in reality, in the sense that it's pretty much what you would expect from real world, just maybe 5 years, or I guess it's about 2.5 years after the shit hits the fan, if you will, and day zero. Because when you start Days Gone, you're 700 and something days, well, gone, since the shit hit the fan. So that's roughly 2 years. So something I skipped in the Horizon Zero Dawn section purposely was so that I could bring it up here now as a comparison. And we're going to look at the main characters a little bit. So in Horizon Zero Dawn, you control Aloy. I know I was surprised her name wasn't Alloy, because I had never heard it for 5 or 6 years since the game came out until I played it on PC. I just thought it was Alloy. And in Days Gone, you're Deacon St. John. A pretty awful name if you ask me. Now the problem with both of these characters is they're both pretty bad in their own ways. Aloy is just dull and uninteresting whatsoever. And hey, I'm Irish, so I'm used to seeing gingers everywhere. And I can confirm, they're usually dull and boring and uninteresting, just like her. And then we've got Deacon St. John, who, well, he's generic in the most generic way, and he's a little bit try-hard in a very generic way. They try to make him a little bit aggressive and a little bit edgy and all and whatnot. It just comes across as no. It just really strikes me as a just no. It just does not work a lot of the time. He's very poor at interacting with many of the other characters. Even his best friend, who he spent the entirety of the outbreak for the 2 years with, it just doesn't work as a character. It's like they got someone with no social skills or no ability to talk to people, or has never talked to someone in real life, and got them to write the character. So both main characters, both in Horizon Zero Dawn and in Days Gone, just completely were write-offs and bad for me. Now let's hit up the open world aspect of it for Days Gone, because, well, they're both open world games. It is one of the two big tropes of the Sony formula. That, and it has to be a cookie cutter third person shooter action adventure game. And I did find the open world in Days Gone a little bit better than the open world in Horizon Zero Dawn. Now, of course, the one in Days Gone does have its own share of problems, but I did find it overall a bit more interesting. It was a bit better layout, how they did the whole thing, because everything is, all the traversal and all is primarily motorbike related. And then, of course, there's all the different camps and landmarks and whatnot. Naturally, since it's based in the real world, you may have power stations, you may have little towns, you may have little villages, you may have cities, you may have petrol stations in the middle of nowhere, etc, etc. And I guess in the case of Days Gone, you've got the likes of the Nero checkpoints, which would be their version of the CDC checkpoints to, you know, check people's infection status and possibly give them a refugee camp and whatnot. So it is based more in reality, and then of course you've got the whole, how would people live, how would people make their own camp and whatnot with real world, I don't want to say technology, but in real world situations. It's people binding logs together to make big walls and camps, people putting up tarps and whatnot, you get the idea. And I personally find that one a bit more appealing and a bit more interesting than the whole Horizon Zero Dawn aspect of it. That's one of the reasons why I'll use this as a quick comparison. When you look at the likes of The Last of Us, or even The Last of Us Part 2, because it's all kind of set in the same thing, it's set in essentially what is the real world. The ruins of the real world, based in reality with real world technology, real world solutions to post-apocalyptic problems and whatnot. And I know that appeals to me a bit more than the likes of Well, I guess they do something similar in Horizon Zero Dawn, but it's far more basic and rudimentary, simply because it's almost like while they have very small bits of futuristic technology, they have less than even the standard modern uses of, I don't want to say technology, but the use of construction and building materials and whatnot, because they're going for the whole tribalism, the whole still weird religious tribalism aspects of it as well. So still on the topic of the open world for Days Gone, here's where it compares with Horizon Zero Dawn. Remember we said Horizon Zero Dawn had a bad open world in the sense that there was tons to do, but it was all the same generic, repeatable stuff, Assassin's Creed style, where it was that there was stuff to do, it was just somewhere between too much to do and boring stuff to do and repetitive stuff to do. Not Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone is kind of similar like that, but it's done more so in a way where there's not enough to do, but at the same time, when there is stuff to do, a lot of it just feels small, repetitive, arguably just random encounters, maybe like you'd see in GTA 5 as an example. You know, you're driving down the road and just someone randomly gets mugged on the side of the road and you can do whatever. You can kill the person, steal their money and return it, or do whatever it is. A lot of the stuff in Days Gone just feels like that. It feels so inconsequential. There are one or two exceptions. You've got the likes of hordes, for example. You've got marauder camps. But a lot of it, all the other stuff, because they really come out as side quests, a lot of the other stuff just doesn't work. It just feels like there's nothing to do outside of the quests. Having said that, making the comparison again between Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone, if I was to choose one or the other, I would pick the Days Gone open world over the Horizon Zero Dawn open world, due to everything we've listed and all the pros and cons, the positives and negatives of both worlds. So let's talk story when it comes to Days Gone. Now, I found the story in this game extremely generic, as expected. I didn't really find any of it interesting because it is 100% exactly the same that you've seen if you've watched a zombie TV show, read a zombie book, seen a zombie film. If you've played even zombie post-apocalyptic games, it's the exact same thing you've played and seen and read and experienced everywhere else. Now, some could say, well, there's only so much they can do, which is technically true, but when you've seen the same thing a dozen times, it just falls flat. Having said that, there were some fun interactions, mainly between the likes of Deacon St. John and Boozer, which is his best friend that he's spent the whole pandemic or whole apocalyptic with, or I guess that would be whole apocalypse with. But other than the interactions with Deacon and Boozer, the only other things that appealed to me at all, the only other things I thought were funny and or interesting at the same time, were the flashbacks with Deacon and Sarah, when Deacon met Sarah, when they were together, when they were teaching each other stuff, or what happened, the situations between them and all, during their flashback scenes. So while that still is a very small, relative at least anyway, a small amount of content and cutscenes and story and backstory and lore in the game, it still definitely came out as more than the likes of Horizon Zero Dawn, when that was the small bit of it that was interesting, or the small bit of it that was enjoyable. Now, before we move on to the gameplay, of course, I do want to mention, just like I did with Horizon Zero Dawn, there was no fast travel in this game. Well, technically there is fast travel in this game. I never used it once, because like I said in the Horizon section, a game that is designed with an open world needs to be able to hold up its open world. And I will say this, while the open world didn't 100% hold up, I did find it more interesting than Horizon. It was a bit more fun to traverse. Now, I know I said I'm not giving it the little rub, the little bit of a bias with a biker side of it. It could have been down to being because of that, but I don't think so. I'm just putting it down to more so the layout and the fact that it's what I would expect, and the design that I like when it comes from the post-apocalyptic based in reality one. I find that way more interesting to move around. Even we'll make the obvious comparison to The Last of Us again, which obviously is not an open world game. Even traversal in that is far more enjoyable and far more interesting, even though it's all on foot. And it's very, very linear. So let's hit up the gameplay when it comes to Days Gone before we finally round out the opinion of Days Gone. So the gameplay in Days Gone I didn't find especially great. I found a lot of it to be very generic. It didn't scale well, if you ask me. Obviously, they start you off really underpowered for obvious reasons. They give you a reason to level up, just like in Horizon Zero Dawn. But it felt like the progression with Days Gone jumped from 0 to 100. At some points for the first couple of levels, you are very weak, and it makes the game kind of difficult, which obviously makes sense. They want you to struggle when coming up against a group of zombies or whatever it is. So you get the idea. But then usually, suddenly out of nowhere, let's just use a random number, you're level 10 and you're still almost kind of struggling. And then you hit level 11 and you're massively overpowered. Coupled with some of the extra bonuses and collectibles and upgrades and all you can get around the real world. I mean, you can get the Nero injectors, which let you boost your maximum health or your maximum stamina or your maximum slow motion focus. Once you get to, again, let's just say level 11 for the sake of it, you're going to be at point X in the game. You're going to be in the first area, and of course you've probably collected all the stuff in the first area, and by the time you get to that and collect all the upgrades and whatnot, you just really overpower the entire game. But at the same time, it didn't feel especially good, it didn't feel especially bad. It was just kind of there. The generic included combat, arguably and basically just for the sake of it. There was nothing special or exceptional about it, there was nothing terrible about it, it just existed as a basic, simple as breathing mechanic. But now, having said all that, let's round it all together, let's crush it all together, mush it all together, do whatever it is we need to do, we formulate and collate and whatever it is we need to do. And basically, what do I think of Days Gone? Now, remember with Horizon Zero Dawn, I went in with zero expectations because I had no interest in the game at all. I was pleasantly surprised for the first couple of hours, and then it just fell off and fell flat completely. Now, Days Gone, on the other hand, I went in with, having no expectations arguably seemed like I didn't go in expecting it to be good, expecting it to be bad. I just went in with no expectations. With Days Gone, I went in kind of expecting it to be bad because the game had been flopped and panned and whatnot on PS4. So I went in expecting it to be bad. So you could arguably say I went in with negative expectations. But by the time I finished it, and by the way, Days Gone was a much longer game than I expected. It took me about 48 hours or so to complete practically everything in it. I've done all the side quests, pretty much all the hordes that I could find. I've got like 98% of them. I think there was one I was missing. There was like one other side quest that I hadn't done, but it was just really find stuff, find the collectibles, that kind of thing. So I've done pretty much 98% of the game, and obviously I completed the story. And Days Gone puts me in a very weird position because of all of that. The entire time I was playing Days Gone, I was actively thinking, okay, hang on, there's nothing great about this game. There's nothing bad about this game. It's very generic and average. There's almost nothing stand out about the game, and practically everything about it is completely average. It's not even slightly better than average. There's one or two things that are slightly below average, but not bad enough to be considered bad. And that makes me think, that brings me back to what we mentioned with the scoring system, the 1 to 10 scale. So, in theory, I told my friend the other day that I would consider Days Gone a solid 4 out of 10. The big problem with that is it's very generic. Practically everything is completely generic and in the middle, with one or two slightly minor things. I never actively thought, oh boy, this is great, I'm having so much fun. But at the same time, I never actively thought, oh, this is boring, this is crap, I'm not having fun. But at the same time, it kept me more interested and more engaged playing the game, playing Days Gone, far more than Horizon Zero Dawn. So, considering what I gave Horizon Zero Dawn as a score, and at the same time, usually what the scale scoring system means, would it be right to give Days Gone a 4 out of 10? A 5 out of 10? I don't know. I honestly can't pick. If anything, I would have to say, and this one is just completely all over the place, because the game would usually be about a 5, because it was completely average and completely generic, not good, not bad. And you could almost say that the one or two subpar things would drop it down to a 4. However, because it kept me engaged and it even made me go back and do so much of the other additional extra stuff after I finished the main story, it almost makes me want to boost it up to something like a 6 or a 7. Because regardless of what happens in my mind when I think about all of that, at the end of the day, it worked. It got me. It got me more interested. It kept me playing the game and kept me slightly more enjoyable in that whole situation, even if I didn't actively think, oh boy, this is fun, oh boy, this is great. When I was playing Horizon Zero Dawn, after the first maybe 10 hours, it was a slog, it was tedious, and I was actively thinking, oh, come on, more of this. But that wasn't the case for Days Gone. So, just for the sake of it, just to give you a better idea, now that I've explained the whole thing, I would give it a 6 out of 10. Just because, that way, it does put it more appealing and slightly more interesting and kept me going than the likes of a completely generic 5 out of 10 game. So yeah, that's a bit weird. But anyway, that's it for the PC Gamer reviews, overhyped, overscored, overpraised X first-party Sony exclusives. Because they are now multi-platform games. Now, of course, the next upcoming PC version of a PlayStation 4 exclusive, that is going to be Uncharted 4. I don't know if I'll buy Uncharted 4. I've had zero interest in the game. In fact, this one, because it's not the first entry in a series like Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone were, I have previously played some of Uncharted. I played the Nathan Drake collection. I played Uncharted 1, which I enjoyed. I don't know why everyone seems to hate Uncharted 1, but I played Uncharted 1 and I enjoyed it. However, Uncharted 2, once you get to about the second half of the game, it was so bad, it put me off the series completely. So therefore, I don't know if I'm going to be buying and playing Uncharted 4 on PC. But again, maybe I do. Maybe this is the whole situation with it. Horizon Zero Dawn really turned me off to the whole idea. It's, well, you can put the game on PC where it will play and look and run better, but it's still essentially a bad, overhyped game. But Days Gone, on the flip side, completely turned that around for me. It's like, well, you could put this game that I had no interest in, that flopped elsewhere, and you put it on there, and it's a bit more interesting. It would be the same with the likes of maybe Uncharted 4. It could possibly be uninteresting and just doesn't do it for me. And just like God of War, I predict if I do play God of War whenever that eventually comes to PC, I probably won't enjoy it. It doesn't appeal to me, but it just looks like it wouldn't be saved by proper visuals, proper performance, and proper controls. But we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, of course, thank you for watching this video the entire way through. Stay salty, fanboys, because you're clearly mad that I don't love Horizon Zero Dawn and I do not consider it a 69 out of 10 Kojima masterpiece, and that I liked Days Gone more than Horizon Zero Dawn. Even though everyone pretty much spoke with their wallets and spoke with their reviews and whatnot about how Days Gone was pretty much panned and was not getting a sequel until it was announced for PC. Then it was like, oh no, we love this, we want this on PlayStation, this game was great, this game was fantastic. And you know what? It may not be great, it may not be fantastic, but it was definitely better than Horizon Zero Dawn. But you know what neither of those games did? Neither of those games would increase my desire to buy a PS5 to potentially play a sequel. Because I'm sorry, PlayStation fanboys, that's not how it works. Even if that is your broken fanboy logic.